Hello friends! My New Year's resolution was to make more LARP content, so here we are. LARP is an incredibly diverse experience. Saying I am going to a LARP can encapsulate a weekend of drinking in a tent, with occasional breaks to hit people with foam swords, an afternoon of intense interpersonal drama and romance that culminates in the most scandalous of hand touches, 48 hours of gibbering panic and fake blood, or indeed a day of being extremely bored in a silly costume. Game runners are often keen to tell you the rules, the timings, and the setting, or at least they should be. Some of them manage to not communicate those very well either. But they're often pretty bad at communicating what game experience they're expecting you to have, or what kind of player or character is going to have a good time at this event. In this video, I'd like to explore some of the ways LARP designers can better communicate their game to players, and how players can better understand and describe what they like. If you're a LARP runner who's struggling to get people to come to your games, I mean, who isn't right now? I can't promise this will fix it, but I think it'll help. It'll certainly cut down on the number of people after the event who proclaim loudly on Facebook that your game is terrible and no one should ever go to one of your events ever again. What's going to happen at your game? Maybe it's the neurodivergence talking, but there have been so many games which refuse to tell you what is going to happen. And I find that infuriating. What am I going to be doing all day or all weekend? Is there going to be combat? Is there going to be exploration? Is there going to be a lot of sitting around and talking? If I don't know these things, I don't know if I want to play. And if you don't tell me, I'm going to make my own assumptions, which are probably wrong. The event is a wedding. Okay, so is the wedding going to go wrong? You don't have to spell that out if you think it should be a surprise. Why would you make that a surprise? But if you go, the event starts with a wedding, it's a horror game with lots of combat, then I'm going to make some assumptions, but I won't fundamentally care if I'm wrong. If I guessed zombies and it's actually aliens, as long as the result is horrifying and fighty. But if you just say, the event is a wedding, the wedding might go wrong, and I'm like, nice, obviously a monster horror. And the wrong is actually that someone's grandma is homophobic and wants to disinherit the happy couple, and the whole thing is a lot of people with 5-page backstories standing around arguing about what Aunt Maggie said to Cousin Bob last year, or that it's a time loop and we were dead the whole time. Seriously, what is it with being dead the whole time? You can't keep repeating the same twist. It's never a good reveal. I came here to hit zombies. I'm clearly having a rubbish time. If war is going to break out at Saturday lunchtime and that will change everyone's game experience for the second half, and there's nothing the players can do to prevent it, tell them. Really actively trying to change something that can't be changed for reasons that weren't communicating is so deeply unsatisfying, to the point of ruining a game experience for a lot of people. Whereas struggling against something with the full out-of-character knowledge that it's futile can be a really good character beat when you're deliberately opted into it. Getting hit with a massive plot development that wasn't as clearly signposted as the game runners thought it was. Players don't talk to each other. I know, it annoys me too, but it's a fact. Again, some people are going to love it, and for some people, it's going to be game ruining. I personally would rather everyone had a 6 or 7 out of 10 LARP experience than most people had an 8 or higher, and like a quarter of your players have a 2 out of 10. I want to be very upfront that I am in camp. If your LARP has a set plot, you should tell people the plot of your LARP. That includes the plot of the LARP is figuring out what is really going on at the LARP. If you don't want the players to take your initial event description at face value, just tell them that there's a mystery and discovery and that they will spend the LARP figuring out the real plot. That's not an aspect of all LARPs, and I think the people who don't signpost this think that it is. Not everyone is plotting 2 levels of double bluff to conceal the actual plotline of their game, I assure you. And many players don't automatically assume that you're lying to them. If you really don't want to tell people the plot of your LARP, or your LARP doesn't have a set plot, there's a whole lot of other stuff you can tell your potential players to set them up for success. What is your game philosophy? What are your game design pillars? That is, what things are important to you about this game? That the world building is really deep and rich and players should learn it? That character backstories shape the plot? That there is no set solution to any given encounter, so you should improvise something completely unexpected? Or that there's one specific solution to every situation and it's about finding it? That problems should be hard, players should have an even possibility of failure, or that character deaths should be extremely rare? What things do you hold at the forefront of your mind when writing your game? What do you want to achieve? What do you want players to experience? Write that down, refine it, sense check it with other people, and then tell your damn players. Often I find out after the fact from the game runners that they knew exactly what their game philosophy was. They just didn't think they needed to tell anyone. Yeah, if you'd told me before booking that actually you really want this to be an airsoft system because realistic feeling combat is super important to you, I would have been more prepared for how much of the game was a scramble for survival as opposed to all the complex interpersonal plot I'd set up. Write down what you think is important in this game, what you want from this game, what you want people to take away from this game. And if it's coherent enough to share with other people, share it with your players. It doesn't have to be long or complicated. I want players to be scared. Character actions are important, and the plot will shape around them. Combat should be tactical, even if that makes it slow. The spirit of the rules is more important than the letter. Consequences will be harsh. 2/3 of the player base will die. These are all great examples of things you can share with your players, or slightly modified versions, that will help them decide if this game sounds fun to them. There is not one objective good game philosophy. Fun is always going to be subjective. But Ash, what if I tell everyone that it's going to be a very scary game about vampires with harsh consequences, and then by the time they play, I thought it would be cooler if the vampires were secretly fairies and characters can't die, and I'm not sure I can make it very scary? Well, for starters, don't do that. Stop doing that. If you have pitched and sold tickets on the grounds that the game is going to be scary and about vampires, immediately start figuring out ways to make the game scary and make sure you can make vampires the main focus of the story. Sure, if you really want, the vampires can secretly be fairies, and maybe that's a cool reveal. Depends how you do it. Maybe it gives players some false hope they can fight the vampires, or maybe it comes out because the players assume that they're weak to sunlight, and that's not true. They're just messing with you. That's a pretty good example of a scary thing getting threatened while under a false sense of security. But the vampires should be as vampire-y and as central as possible. These players don't want to meet 5 different kinds of fairies, so the vampires don't seem that important, and they don't want this to suddenly be a solvable problem where everyone goes home happy because they figured out they're actually fairies. You sold them vampires and threat. They want vampires and threat. And based off that pitch, I'm pretty sure most of them expected to die horribly this weekend. Do it! They'll love it! It'll be great! What am I doing? What do you expect your players to be doing on an hour-to-hour basis in your game? And yes, I say hour-to-hour because you need that level of granular detail or your players will get bored. It's much harder than people think to set up a game where players can self-sustain roleplay while nothing happens. And in my personal experience, it usually depends way more on the players you get than the game you wrote. If you have a really small player base, you might need to drop from hour chunks to 15-minute chunks because the inertial mass of the player base is that much smaller. The flip side of this is that fest LARPs with hundreds of players can kind of self-sustain, but based on the timetable of meetings that I'm presented with every time one of my friends talks about Empire, it self-sustains by creating its own timetable of events and activities. Your detailed timetable, which you absolutely should have, doesn't need to be communicated to players. There's a very clear subset of games where it's useful to go 2 p.m. skirmish, 3 p.m. debate, 4 p.m. end of world. And you'll know if you're expecting players to keep track of their own timetable. However, based on your timetable and the expectations you have as to how many players are taking part in your timetabled events and activities and what the others are going to be doing, you can make some generalizations and communicate that to your potential players. If you've got skirmishes planned every 1 to 2 hours, or even more frequently, you have a combat-heavy game. Tell people it's a combat-heavy game. Are you running out linears or attacking the house, or a combination of both? Is the base camp safe? That's useful information for an accessibility reason, if nothing else. Are there puzzles? Are there codes? There shouldn't be, but no one listens to me. Is social roleplay a major theme? If so, how are you doing character links? Will NPCs be showing up? Are players going to be chasing down plot or research? How much agency to wander away from the central storyline do they have? Do players have choices on where the story goes? Some of these things we'll revisit in just a moment. This is not just going to help players decide if they're going to have fun at your game, because they can visualize what they're actually going to be doing and they'll know whether they like those things, but it's also going to help you plug one of the big issues in LARP, which is, what is everyone else doing? Some people run games where everyone is going along to every encounter, and that's fine. It has benefits and it has drawbacks, and it can be pretty tricky to do well, especially once you get over about 15 people, unless your game is a large continuous social event with a big central space where something is happening almost continuously. But for most games, not everyone is going on every linear or talking to every NPC, yet you may only be running one linear or encounter out at a time. So what's everyone else doing? If you're going to have events and activities, you need to have a realistic idea of how many people are doing each activity at any given time, and also what's available to everyone else. Maybe your linears are as many people as you like. Maybe they're 10 people, 6 people, 3 people. Those are numbers you need to know in advance. And the flip side of that if you have 30 players, that means 10, 20, 24, 27 people are doing what exactly? Waiting for people to get back is unacceptable as an answer. One of the reasons I really hate codes in games, other than the fact that codes are, unless you do a really, really good job of inventing something totally new, fundamentally reliant on out-of-character hard skills, and thus not really immersive or accessible or a seamless part of the game world, is that the number of people who can be working on a coded letter at any given time is 1. Some people try and solve this by seeding multiple letters, and all that means is that one player stops trying to crack the code so that they can collect and hoard all of the letters, because it's their thing, damn it. Codes only really get handed off when someone can't crack them, and look, by the time that's happened twice, that code is not getting cracked. You've just frustrated multiple people. You've not actually shared any information or given anyone anything to do. I know I say this every time. Run talky NPCs who can drop plot, provide information, or otherwise reward people for interacting out at the same time as combat encounters. Especially if you enforce a cooldown period, whether it's to regain hit points or some other reason. If the game rules mandate that players have to sit around for a bit after a combat encounter, give them a reason not to resent you for having to skip the next linear. But even more generally, if your game has non-coms, and it probably has non-coms, give them something to do. Give them a reward for not going out on that linear. Make the players feel okay about not bullying you into allowing 12 people on this 8-person combat mission. We're simple creatures. But still, remember, the maximum number of people who can talk to one NPC at a time is a number less than 5. It's not enough. What are the fun, ongoing actions that people can be engaged with basically all the time? Is there crafting, research, healing, big rituals? The more collaborative these can be, the more people's time they eat up, and the longer is spent faffing around trying to coordinate and make things happen. Which isn't to say that everything should involve industrial cat herning and drive a small number of players to distraction. I mean, some people genuinely enjoy go solo roleplay in a corner for 20 minutes. But if most of the ambient activities can be started at almost any time and take 3 to 5 people, then with a small amount of ref support, very quickly, the players will occupy themselves, causing problems for themselves. Finally, there's social roleplay, which should, in theory, take up the slack and fill in the gaps. I think some game runners believe that social roleplay just happens on its own and they don't need to do anything about that. No! People need to already be friends and or already very invested in their well-developed characters and or have deliberately set up dynamic character links to pull that off. If you want social roleplay to happen, you need to give the players big, open-ended questions and problems. You need to give them stuff to have opinions on. You need to give them stuff to care about. You need to, who do I know and how do I get involved? Are character links important? Do I need to make my own? When things kick off, how am I going to get into the action? Do I need previous knowledge? Do I need friends? Am I valued because I have a particular skill set? Or am I reliant on people liking me? Do I have to chase the plot, or is the plot going to come and find me? There's a couple of main points here, and I want to reiterate again that there isn't a right or wrong way of doing this, just that you should know what you're doing and ideally communicate clearly to your players, ideally ahead of booking what you're doing. This is the kind of thing players will warn each other about anyway, and if you're not getting it right, you'll likely be the last to know that everyone thinks you only get plot at your game if you're a personal friend of the refs, when you'd intended to run a game where anyone could get involved. If you state that up front, players are more likely to tell you that they think you're falling short before they tell the entire LARP sphere on Facebook. The only people who think about character links are the people running purely social games with pre-written characters. And it shows. A lot of people leave this up to the players to sort out on their own, which isn't inherently bad, but it fundamentally disadvantages new LARPers, particularly new LARPers with no existing LARPer friends, or just people with no friends at your game, or even just people who aren't terminally online, didn't realise that everyone else was doing character links, and has turned up without any. If you just leave it up to players to sort out on their own with no guidance, you'll end up with 3 people who've written a very specific bit or long intense interpersonal drama that will dominate their game, and potentially the games of everyone close to them, and 27 people wondering why those 3 got singled out for special plot or how they get in on that. Are character links important? If your game is going to have a lot of social roleplay and doesn't have specific character skill sets, and doesn't have personal plot so anyone can do basically anything, then yes, they are. Because at that point, your ability to interact with the game is dictated by who likes you. Again, not a terrible way to run a game as long as you communicate to your players ahead of time that they should build character links. The best game I ever went to for this specifically actually gave guidance on how many links, what kind, 1 positive, 1 negative, and 1 neutral, and some tips on how to do them well. You know each other, you met one time, you've heard this person's name, is not a useful thing to have in a game. There's actually very little to be done with that. If your game is heavily plot driven, high threat, you'll be handing out personal plot problems that will take multiple people to solve, and you know that any given character will be forced to interact with other characters constantly to find out who's a healer, who has magic, who can help with X or Y, and there's a good in-character fig leaf for you all to be strangers, character links are way less important. Players can happily roll in with none, and it's not only okay for you to say that up front, it's really helpful. The flip side to what am I going to be doing all day is, when these things are happening, how do I get involved? And there's a variety of ways of solving the problem of dragging people into stuff. And you know what? You guessed it. It'd be really helpful to players if you communicated which of these you're going to employ. I've already touched on a bunch of these methods. 2 of them, plot and skill sets, we're going to go into in more detail in just a second. But I think it's important to highlight the role asking my mates if they want to do the thing I think they'll enjoy plays in LARP. As I keep reiterating, it's not a bad thing. We generally LARP with our friends. But if your game has limited linears with limited spots, expect it'll come into play very heavily unless you take active steps to counteract it. I'd like to know in advance if this is a game I should play with 4 friends, or if it's a game I can show up to solo and still get stuck in regardless of whether people like me. How is plot distributed? At this point, I have to point out, your game might not have any plot. That's cool, and absolutely something you should tell players before they book. Plot, the story of your LARP, but also colloquially used in the sense of giving players something important to do, is a hugely subjective thing. There isn't a good way of doing story and story component distribution, in spite of what many players and some game runners will tell you, but most people have a strongly preferred option, which is why it slightly baffles me that people aren't upfront about how they're planning to handle it. Is there a pre-planned ending, or several pre-planned endings that you'll jiggle to fit, or no pre-planned ending? How much will get resolved at this event versus over the whole campaign? Are there incidents that are going to be difficult or impossible to avert? Are encounters active or reactive? Are they based on player action, or have you got them all written out in advance and you're just going to fling them out as and when? Is there one big overarching plot, or multiple big plots, or lots of little plots, or any combination of those? Is any plot going to be hitting or only relevant to parts of the player base because of background or skill set or something else? Are you going to be handing out plot threads before the game even starts? How well telegraphed is the introduction of new plot threads and quests and puzzles? Can you nom onto a new thing just by accidentally standing in the right place? Or does it take work and cooperation? Is there personal tailored plot, or is it all generic? How much plot is going to be gatekept in some way? Is plot going to be based on my character's backstory and skill set? How important is character creation? I'm so damn tired of writing the wrong character for the game I end up playing. Tell people what you want from them and what you don't want, and tell them how you're going to use it. Everyone has a free text box saying write your character backstory here on their character creation form, but that will give you everything from 5 bullet points to free prose, maxing out the character limit you didn't know that form had, and can result in everything from games where your character backstory literally forms part of the backbone of the plot, to games where you may as well not have written one. I'd really like to spend the time and energy on the detailed and elaborate backstory for the games where you intend to use and do something with it, and not invest that time and energy and instead give you 5 bullet points on the games that barely intend to read it. It's completely fine to be like, actually we don't want to do individual plot, just let us know where you're from and give us like 3 things your character cares about or wants to get involved in, and we'll steer you at the bit of the game we think you'd like. That's already more detail than backstory here. Of course, if you ask for specifics, give us NPC names, give us the horrible smoking guns in your past we can use to hurt you. Players are going to expect you will use them, and be disappointed when you don't. But again, feel free to say NPCs may not appear, but we'll let you send letters to them, or personal plot will be very limited in scope, we can't promise more than 1 or 2 scenes max. And that will really help players work with you to make something that you'll be able to make enjoyable. As always, if everyone dies at the end of your game, tell me so I can write a horrible, useless person who deserves it. The other big factor in some character creation is skill choices. How important are they, really? Am I going to be the only healer in the party and that's actually really important and I'll be in very high demand? Will there be plot rolling out connected to engineers specifically? Is my knowledge of ancient lore manifest as being able to read all of about 3 lammies in the game? I'm not even talking about game balance here, that's a different video. Tell people to what extent your skills are going to come up in the game. More specifically, tell them how their skills are going to come up in the game. I think I speak for every foreign language learner when I say that languages is not a set of code keys, and everyone is slightly disappointed when it turns out that's what it is in your game, but also actual translation is incredibly hard and basically a purely out of character skill set, and something that the vast majority of people will not enjoy. Is engineering going to be represented through freeform roleplay, or logic puzzles, or playing Operation? Very different people are going to enjoy those 3 things. Tell them which one it is so the others aren't disappointed or upset. Finally, I don't have another good place to put this. If you're asking for unconventional character or booking information, tell me roughly what you're doing with it. Whether it's your character's greatest fear or closest loved one, my out of character real life honest to god home address, or something as off the beaten track as in character video interview ahead of the game, or look, a game once asked me for my character's signature, and never once mentioned, you know, whether I had to be able to replicate it in the actual game. 6 months away. Please just be realistic about what it's reasonable for your players to provide, and communicate what you're going to do with the information they give you. It doesn't have to be detailed. You're not getting my address unless you explicitly tell me you want to post me something actually important, not a generic invite to the event. And my character's greatest fear will differ substantially depending on whether you're going to gently taunt me with it or make me relive it in real time. Speaking of what it's reasonable for your players to provide, what's the point of your costume brief? Everyone has a costume brief. Almost nobody has sat down and thought about why they want a costume brief. Do you want players to be able to easily identify the faction, gender, or class of another character? Do you want strong group identities? Do you want players to be able to express something about their character to other players? Do you want a unified game look? Do you want meaningful stat lines to be attached to costume choices? Do you want to inspire creativity and just let people wear really cool things? Do you want the photos to look neat? There is nothing inherently wrong with any of these options, although the last one will make me give you the smallest of side eyes, as trust me, that's not the costume brief's job. But please, pick 1 or 2 and communicate it. Let players know what to prioritize. Is it more important that they wear a historically plausible outfit that is the wrong faction color, or an outfit that is the right faction color but not really the correct silhouette? Also, do you care? Is your costume brief important to you, or do you just have one because IDK, you should have one? A lot of the time when people bung in a costume brief they don't super care about at the last minute, it's weirdly prescriptive. No, friends, just wear a brown tunic and trousers is not the low effort, accessible to all option you think it is. If you don't super care what people are wearing, give people as broad a vibe as possible and minimal specifics. Make it clear from the start what your expectations are and let players make their own decisions about whether they can meet them or not. Do not use a Pinterest board as a costume brief. I will come over there and I will find you. How much engagement are you expecting outside of the game? Is character creation a multi-step process? Am I going to have to motivate myself to network with other players? Is there a downtime system? Is letter writing to other players between games a major component? Are you going to write me a 6-page brief I'm expected to memorize? Are you allowing player events? Do I need to write and commit to an entire valid character to book? And how much time do I actually have to do that? And does that guarantee me a place or not? Do you expect me to join a bloody Discord and thus have your LARP unavoidably present in stream of consciousness form my entire waking life? Some people want a whole second life as their one LARP character, and some people, me most of the time, have agreed to devote to your game from Friday night to 2 p.m. Sunday afternoon and not a single minute more. And if we are at the same event, we are going to resent the hell out of each other. Most people are in the middle of that spectrum somewhere. And your game is going to cater to a spectrum of people. There will be people who resent doing anything you ask outside of the game itself, but they want to play, or they like you, so they're making an effort. And there will be people who would very happily do more, but without buy-in from others, they're just going to do character art and fic and noodle around on their own time. But you can only reasonably accommodate a subset of the full engagement spectrum. If your game has player events, for example, that's going to be a hard turn-off for some people. Also, no one likes the scope creep of what they thought was going to be book a place, submit a character, play the game, turning into book a place, submit several rounds of character creation form, deal with character revisions, network with other players, do further character revisions, get back a massive brief ahead of the game, fend off people who want to text roleplay ahead of the weekend, get everyone's minute-by-minute updates about their character on Discord, find out that because they missed 3 separate player events, the plot they were interested in got resolved already. Be upfront about what you're going to be asking from players. Am I going to find this unplayable? And what happens when I do? There's a generally agreed upon list of subjects and themes that are off limits at LARP, and things that are absolutely okay and fine. And guess what? It's different from LARP group to LARP group. And also, LARPers are really weird. Super weird. It's a really weird list. Times I have been told genocide is totally justifiable and actually may be a good thing just this one time at a LARP. More than 3. Times refs have made out of the blue, offhand references to or given descriptions of suicide when that's listed as a sensitive theme in the game. At least 2. At least. Times I've been told it's unacceptable to talk about pregnancy, a thing many reasonably normal people experience positively at some time in their life. Several. Times that weekend involved no less than 2 dead babies with no prior warning. Only 1, but boy do I remember it vividly. Times pregnancy was a central theme of the game, and my character got told she couldn't have kids with her wife, so she should probably just break up with the love of her life. Still only 1, but yeah. That wasn't even central plot, that was players not having been given any briefing on how to handle a situation that in hindsight was bound to arise, given it was, as previously stated, a central theme of the game. So let's break this down. Your list of acceptable and unacceptable themes can be anything you want, but please think about what they are and why they're there. There are big chunks of the kind of LARP I go to where, for example, it's broadly fine to talk generally about suicide, but never ever mention pregnancy loss. And most people I've talked to have not been able to explain why they think those things should be that way round. Like, I don't think that's inherently wrong and bad, but if you can't explain why you've made that choice, it'll upset people is not an explanation. I'm just going to conclude you went, dunno, that feels right, and as such are probably inadvertently playing into some harmful dominant narratives like a culture of silence and isolation around miscarriage, a a relatively common thing that a lot of people experience at some point in their life. And then assume is really rare and terrible because no one talks about it. Yeah, your grown-up fancy dress make-believe has cultural weight. I don't know what to tell you. Then when you have your list of themes that are off limits and those that are restricted, get granular. What specifically can people do or not do, talk about or not talk about? What does something being a sensitive theme actually mean? Give examples, break things down, be specific, be clear. Vagueness is the enemy. You're going to need that specificity because the next thing you need to do is establish and communicate how people can flag that the rules have been broken and how you're going to enforce that in play. Which leads me to my final and perhaps most important point when it comes to expectation setting. Can I trust you? Let me make one thing absolutely clear. If you are running a LARP, chances are I don't know you. Certainly, I spent the first couple of years of LARPing playing a lot of games where I didn't know anyone there. If you run a game, apart from in a very narrow set of circumstances, you will almost certainly have someone there you've never met or only very briefly interacted with before. And yet that person is trusting you with their money, their time, and their safety. Don't push your luck. Every time I've queried something about a game, how are you going to implement these rules? I'm concerned the plot is going in this direction. This theme seems like it would open up to X behavior. I'm not happy with this behavior from the refs. What is this game actually about? The response I've gotten from the game runners has almost always been somewhere along the spectrum of, trust me, bro. Don't get me wrong, I want to trust you. Just please give me some sign that you're trustworthy. Be clear, be concise, be honest, be professional, be assertive. How are we going to implement these rules? Like this, and these are our expectations, and if these specific things happen, we will address it like this. And thank you for asking, we'll update the wiki. You concerned about the plot? I hear you. I'm not going to diminish your feelings or tell you not to worry. Can I offer you a conversation about what our plans are? I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'm happy to be frank about our position so we can see together whether this game is still a good fit for you. We've thought really hard about that theme and how it might be implemented in play before deciding to include it in the game. And so, I hear your concerns. We've anticipated that X behavior might occur, and the guidance is on this page of the website, and this is how we'd respond to it if it happens. But let me know if you have further feedback. I'll be honest and say I hadn't considered Y behavior, but thank you for flagging it. Let me clarify our position and we'll add some more detail to the brief. If you're uncomfortable with this being a theme in the game at all, this may not be the game for you. Thank you for flagging this behavior to us. I hear you. I agree we have fallen short of our standards. I'm going to take this further and I will give you a general update on the action we're taking on this timescale. Great feedback. I can tell we haven't communicated our intentions on this very well. Here are some brief broad strokes of what I'm going for that I can absolutely confirm now, but some stuff is up in the air still, so let me rework some briefs and talk to the other refs and I will get back to you and everyone else before character booking opens. What you don't want to be doing is going, don't worry about it, we got this, it'll be fine, you'll love it, we know what we're doing. How could you question X? Don't you know we worked really hard on it? Obviously we're taking this seriously and going to do it properly, or my personal favourite, absolute radio silence. I want to play your game. I want to trust you. The least you can do is at least attempt to act trustworthy and not entitled to my money and time because you had a cool idea. Anyone can have cool ideas. I'm sorry, you're not special. Conclusion. Fundamentally, a lot of this gets summed up as know what kind of game you're running and be upfront and clear in communicating that to your players. Everything from vague skill descriptions to mis-selling the plot comes down to not fully thinking through what you're going to do and then not telling the players that. And fundamentally, that's all expectation management is. Tell the players, the crew, yourself clearly what you're going to do. It's that simple. Don't go, oh, I can finalize that later. Oh, that's fine, I can change things right up to the last minute. Oh, why do the players keep asking me questions about the setting that aren't important? Be specific, be clear, know your own mind and what you're trying to do, and above all else, communicate. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to keep the YouTube gods happy. Follow me on Instagram to see pictures of my cat. Or Tumblr, I'm on Tumblr now. And down in the description box you'll find a link to my Ko-fi page where you can make a one-off or recurring donation. You could also consider becoming a channel member, which gets you early access to all of my videos and a couple of fun extra perks. Both are great ways to support this channel and my quest to make sure no one ever uses a code puzzle in a game ever again. And I couldn't do what I do without your help. Dream big, and I'll see you next time.